Another behavior tip is to really, in order to change a problem behavior or have the person learn a new behavior, we first have to understand the components of the disruptive behavior. So today we want to talk about some very basics in behavior management. Number one, we have to remember that behavior serves a purpose or it does not exist. A person has to get something from that behavior, or he feels like he's meeting some need for it to present. And this is either a positive behavior or a negative behavior. Today we're thinking in terms more of when people present negative behaviors. The next thing is that we need to remember that behavior is multifaceted. You know, lots of times for many years we looked at behavior, here it presents, and that's the behavior. And what the traditional way, or historically, people would punish that behavior till it would go away, but they didn't resolve by giving people another way in order to meet the purpose and function of what they were trying to do with the maladaptive behavior or the bad behavior. So one of the things that we're going to talk about just briefly here is, and I want you to think about this when you're assessing, why does the person present this problem behavior? And then we need to understand, so this behavior, the premise is that it is influenced by a lot of variables, if this is the problem behavior. One of the things that happens is that behavior is highly influenced by social context, by the people around, by the way people are asked to do things, by poor communication intent, unclear communication, or unclear expectations. There's a variety that another little training segment talks about. But we need to understand that behavior exists to serve a purpose and function for the person, whether it is good behavior or bad behavior. The second thing we need to remember is that behavior is influenced by a lot of variables that influence it. It's multi-influenced by a lot of variables. And the next one is that it relates in response to social context. Who's in the environment? What's being said? What others are doing? The next thing in looking at this, we need to sort of think, well, why is this person presenting a behavior? And it could be for a number of reasons. The basic reasons are to gain attention, to be able to get the attention of those around the person. The next one may be to escape. They just don't want to do it, so then they present a disruptive behavior in order to get people to back away from them or to be able to escape the request or whatever it is. Another thing that people use behaviors for is sensory seeking. Some people are sensory seeking, some people are sensory avoiding, and when they're put in situations that they're not comfortable with, then you'll have the presentation of the problem behavior. Let's look back at this. Let's review some of the things that come as a result of that. A lot of research in the last 20 years has really pointed to the fact that behavior is communication based. That people are trying to communicate a need, a want, or a desire, and that if we don't understand what they are trying to communicate, we have little probability of changing the problem behavior. The next one is behavior is a function of the environment or psychological conditions or things that are going on in that person's life. They may even be internal conditions. The person is sick, and what happens is then the person is more disruptive during that time because he does not know how to solve his problem related to the illness. If we take this problem behavior again and look at, well, so how are we going to assess it? How are we going to determine it? The first thing is, don't assume the person is presenting the behavior just to be naughty, because that generally is not it. It usually, again, is to meet a purpose and function for the person. So we have this problem behaviors, and there are variables that present before the problem behavior, and there are variables that present after the problem behavior that either reinforce this problem behavior or they maintain this problem behavior. He keeps using it and using it because the need is met. So let's look at some of these variables. The first will be the setting events. These are conditions that exist in the person's life that change the way they respond to the antecedent. Now again, these are variables that present before the behavior. So let's say a setting event may be the person did not get sleep. Maybe they have a habitual sleeping problem, and then the next morning when mom or someone else asks the person to do something, they have a major meltdown. And it's not that they're necessarily trying to be naughty and not responsive, but they're just responding to the overwhelm, all the conditions that associate with the not sleeping. So the setting event are conditions that exist that change how a person responds to an antecedent. Now that antecedent is the trigger that occurs immediately before the presentation of the behavior. So let's take a look at the behavior. Temper tantrum, screaming, yelling, rolling around on the floor, calling people names. The person may be ill. The person may have some kind of internal stimuli, like some kind of anxiety disorder or some kind of mood disorder. That can be an internal influence. It could be that the person had a fight at school with someone, and then he comes home and mom says to him, "I need you to clean your room." And then we start the escalation of this problem behavior. So there's two things to remember before. Setting events, they are conditions that exist in that person's life. It can be from several hours, even a day before, or an ongoing condition, to the immediate antecedent or trigger that's presented that initiates the problem behavior. It's critical to understand those in order to be able to assess how, what the components of this problem behavior are. It's unsuccessful just to punish a behavior when it presents. The behavior has to be looked at, and then we need to determine what's going on. And then the second condition is that follows this problem behavior, down here, it comes after, is the response to that problem behavior. What people do after the presentation of the behavior. And this is a critical component because this determines how that behavior is reinforced or not reinforced. So what happens is he has the meltdown, he yells, he screams, carries on. Mom just says, "Fine, I'm done with this." She leaves the room, and he's never expected to carry out what the request was. So he slowly learns, not that he's intentionally trying to be naughty, but he's learned that if I don't want to do this, this is what I do. So the action behind that problem behavior becomes very critical. Now, in further little training tips, we'll talk about ways to implement or to avoid that from happening. But it's very critical that people remember that they're managing first the setting events, then the antecedent, and then the maintaining consequence or the reinforcement that happens after the presentation of the behavior that gives that behavior power. It really is all about power. As we go on through these little tips, you will notice that there are other things then that can support this or help you find more ways of being able to pick this behavior apart and understand what's going on. But the challenge is not to look at a behavior just because you think that person's trying to be naughty, but look at it in terms of what it is accomplishing for that person.